Hey everyone, welcome back to Kinetic. Thank you again to our sponsors. Next, we have our panel allies and advocates who get it. This is a very candid Ask Me Anything session. Please over-index on asking questions. I'm going to bring to the stage Deirdra, who is our moderator. She's an experienced designer, clutter and chaos breaker, and more than anything, a curious explorer. She helps individuals shape their vision for the future, understand the present more fully, and chart a course from one to the other. She brings insights from 20 plus years in corporate entrepreneurial and nonprofit and social innovation spaces. She leads her consulting firm, Conserte, as a chief experience officer. Her heart for entrepreneurs is steeped in a deep desire to unlock the tools that drive equity, access, and growth to change the trajectory of wealth in marginalized communities like ours. Please join me, Deirdra. Welcome to have you. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I couldn't think of a better place to be on this lovely Saturday here in Atlanta. And I'm really excited to be with you. So I would like to bring to the stage for our very candid discussion, Leura Craig. She's a general partner at Outlander Labs. Joe Beverly, the CEO of Cranium Incubator and former president of the Atlanta Technology Angels. Bill Aulet, managing director, the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship and professor of the practice, Sloan School of Management. Hi, Bill. And Alice Loy, founder, creative startups and investor, DaVinci Ventures. And Melissa Chapman, the senior program officer at the Kauffman Foundation. Welcome. All right, so we said this panel today is a candid discussion with allies and advocates who get it. And I know that is how we can describe each of you in your own right. And this is a candid Ask Me Anything session, so we'll start with some initial questions, but we really look forward to diving into your questions from the broader community that's participating. So, Bill, we'll get started with you. You were a major motivator for the KINETIC project. Tell us about your involvement in it and what motivated you to encourage MIT in the broader community and entrepreneurial ecosystem at large to help solve this racial inequity problem.
Very much for having me. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm so proud of everything that's been accomplished. Kevin, Morgan, Ariel, Jonah, Jared, Antonio, Oni, all of you out there. This is just fabulous. When we first got started, the thing that, obviously, and by the way, I don't know that I'm a great ally. I just try to do my best. And anytime you think you're great at something, you're not humble and you're not going to be good at it. So I think I've got a long ways to go. But I think what really woke us all up was, it was always there, but the George Floyd just created a window of opportunity that we had to do something. And when you look at the data, we love data at MIT, and you've heard a lot of it today. You look at the studies and you see that, the median net worth of a household in Boston is $8 for blacks, and it's $247,000 for Caucasians. And we can have no social justice without economic justice. Andrew Young says that, and it's just obvious. And so we thought we needed to do something about that. And I don't mean theater, I mean doing something concrete. So that's when we brought in Kevin, Jonah, Morgan, Ariel, our whole community to say, what can we do? And we just stepped back, and I think it's, if I can, I'll just say the three things I think about being an ally that I've learned. If I can say I'm a good one, is ERC. First, it's got to be empathetic. And we don't have enough of this in our society today. You have to be empathetic. You have to understand. You have to help other people. You can't lead, you have to help them. And so we decided, we really reached into our empathy bag and lathered ourselves up with that. And I think that's really important. The second one is, I think it's very important to think about results. You first have to understand empathy. Why are you doing this? It's not about the how and the what, as we say in entrepreneurship. It's not as much about the how and the what as it's about the why and the who. So you have to be empathetic, you have to understand the why and the who, but even when you understand that, I think it's all about results. And Chameleonaire brought this up when we're doing it. You know, we don't want more theater. There's plenty of that out there. I'm a basketball person, and John Wooden said, never confuse activity with achievement. We need results. So if you're going to be a good ally, don't focus on activity, don't focus on the achievements, focus on results. And that's what we wanted to do with Kinetic from the beginning. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, is the C, the ERC, is community. The one thing, you know, when we started to do this, we realized that there was not as strong a community as there needed to be. And in entrepreneurship, there's no single point of success. There's no silver bullet. But what to be successful, you need is many things. And we talk about the heart. You have to have the spirit. You have to not only have the spirit, you have to have the head, the knowledge as to what to do. You have to have the hands, the capability to do it. But the fourth H is a home. You have to have a community, because entrepreneurship, at its very definition, is the pursuit of opportunities with resources beyond your control. And this community has not bonded together to, as you've heard many people talk about today, to make their power to get more resources. And this is why funding is so important. And it's only going to be done by forming a community. And that, you know, community doesn't make it successful by itself. Funding doesn't make it successful by itself. But those are the things that we felt that we could do, that were empathetic by listening and results oriented to start with. So thank you. As being someone not from Atlanta here, I'm also representing the Northeast, I guess. Got someone from New Mexico, Melissa from the Midwest. Good to see you, Melissa. And Joe, you're from Atlanta. Where are you from, Leura?
I'm based in Atlanta also.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
As am I. So you're holding it down for the Northeast for us, but with Alice, we and Melissa out west, we kind of have a far reach, and I love it. Thank you so much for getting us started, Bill. So going forward into our next question, each of you in your own right has been a visible advocate or ally during these times of social and, to a degree, economic upheaval. Leura, I'd like to go to you next, and I'll ask, what in your background or upbringing or even your family experience gives you such a strong sense of equity and the motivation to use your wealth, your power, your privilege to affect change in this space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always joke that I'm your typical blonde Jew from South Alabama, which any of you have ever spent time in South Alabama is not typical at all. So obviously white, very privileged, but, you know, I think growing up feeling always a bit of an outsider and having some pretty rough experiences growing up with people saying things like, oh, you know, the Nazis should have stayed long enough to finish off the job, and, you know, wear your horns and your tail. And, you know, I experienced a lot of, you know, anti-Semitism growing up in the South, unfortunately. And I think that made me realize that it is so important for, you know, one of my friends, actually, mothers, had a great expression growing up, which is that normal ain't nothing but a setting on a washing machine. And I think that growing up feeling a bit different, a bit on the outside, like, that was really helpful and made me always want to figure out a way where I could create inclusivity and support all different types of groups. And especially when you're kind of are on the outside. And that was actually one of the motivations for the fund, in terms of naming our fund Outlander, which is that, you know, we believe that entrepreneurs should be people who are comfortable kind of living on the outside. They're explorers. They're people who are, you know, not afraid of venturing into unknown concepts and foreign lands. And then, you know, what further punctuated this was, you know, my own experience as a female founder. I raised, you know, $30 million in venture capital, and we all know how appalling the stats are around, you know, women receiving venture capital dollars. And then those stats just get even worse when you're looking at people of color and then women of color. And so, you know, I got very frustrated witnessing firsthand, you know, white male founders raising 3 to 5 times as much money as me with, significantly less businesses in terms of their traction and what they were accomplishing. And I saw it firsthand that the hurdle was so much higher being a female entrepreneur, and not even as high as if I were a woman of color. And so, the way that I felt like I could create change, and that we are trying to create change, is, fundamentally, I think one of the best ways to create impact, and I agree with what Bill is saying, is that it's all about activity is good as long as it leads to an outcome. And for us, it's like, let's write checks into the hands of founders that don't look like your standard Silicon Valley founder or your standard white male heterosexual founder, because that's what it always looks like. And that creates this flywheel and perpetuates what we've seen prevents people from accessing this capital and building great businesses and hiring more executives that are diverse and creating changes within the communities that they're building these businesses in. And so, when I was running my startup and large groups of women talking about how do we create change for the female community, it was like, we need a lot of women to make a boatload of money so that they can write checks for other women. And I think just across the board, that's what we're trying to do. That's what I think a lot of great people are trying to do, is let's put dollars in the hands of visionary leaders and entrepreneurs and people who want to create change, and let them, create that change. But we have to provide the financial support in order to do that. And so I think that, I've had I think a wonderfully privileged life, but I think that coming a little bit from the outside, because of my religion, and then being a female founder, really lit a fire to figure out a way to how do I create more opportunities and more inclusivity so that, that wealth and founder landscape and all of these things don't look the way they look today.
Thank you so much, Leura. You touched on something that reminds me of a reference that Philip Gaskin made earlier, and it's this notion of have an asset mindset. So, Melissa, I'm going to pose this question to you. How do we get white funders or Black funders or any funder for that matter to see the value of our businesses as more than a philanthropic lens? Sometimes that's sort of the starting posture position. I'm curious about how do we change or affect that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. As I think I work at the Kauffman Foundation, which is a philanthropy based in Kansas City. And the work that we do at Kauffman and many other philanthropies do as well, really is dedicated to helping those organizations that support entrepreneurs. And so I think when you're talking about making the transition from seeing businesses as kind of a philanthropy play to, a great business investment, which, by the way, is what they are. I think you can quote about 15 different studies talking about how much better even startup investments perform when there's a diverse team around the table. I see that in a couple of ways. First, as Leura said, telling the stories of success that are inclusive so that everyone can see the breadth of great entrepreneurship that is happening in this country is so important. Additionally, I think making sure that we're providing all sorts of resources, capital resources, of course, but also support resources, mentoring resources is equally important. As we all know, there's so many factors that go into a business having success and starting and growing and creating jobs across the country. And so making sure that every piece of that resource continuum is there, is accessible, is culturally relevant, I think is really what our work is concentrated on. So, my work specifically is focused in the middle of the country, but we have a lot of progress left to make in this region. But there are so many dedicated allies, advocates, grassroots organizations, larger organizations that are working together with express intention around making sure that we take that asset framing and we change the way that we see entrepreneurs of color. And I think that is a really exciting time to be doing this work. So I think, asset framing, as Philip said earlier, and by the way, Philip is my boss and he's a great pleasure to work with. It's more than just kind of changing your language. It's really about changing what you consider to be valuable in society. And so often we have, a tendency to look at businesses and see them through that single capitalist frame. What's their revenue like? And that is really the marker of success. There are so many great assets and rich assets that are available in community, that changing that frame and seeing, local support, seeing in-kind support from a community. If we could just broaden our view of what's valuable, I think that would lead to a massive shift in how we think about businesses and business success.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. I want to go into, again, this is the candid conversation, right? And as we anticipate questions from the group, I want to go to a space that's not often talked about enough, but I would love to have your perspective on. And it is, in our community, there can be some seriously positioned or even jokingly stated perspectives that to increase the odds of funding, we should find and place a white guy on our team. Or even a white person present somewhere, perhaps in a deck or as a board member. From an investor's perspective and knowing the realities of the industry, does it make sense to make those biases work for you in by doing that? Like, is that a real thing? And what should businesses do as they think about that? Joe, you want to dive into this one?
Nothing like getting an easy question right off.
Absolutely.
So, I look at the whole team, and somebody mentioned earlier that diverse teams do better. So I don't really care if there's a white guy on the team or not. What I want is intelligent founders. I want founders who are going to work the 80, 90, 100-hour weeks necessary to, to be successful. Racism it's something that's learned. It's not something that we're born with. And so unfortunately, I was not raised in a situation where I was taught racism. Much the opposite. I grew up in a bunch of different places, went to 12 different schools between kindergarten and when I graduated high school, and very lower middle class background. So I was just never taught that you should think about somebody differently because of their skin color. There were times when if I didn't have Black friends in the neighborhood, I wouldn't have had any friends at all, because we were sort of the minority. we were some of the only white people. And I was never taught to care about somebody about what the color, whether the color of their skin was this or that, or what their gender was. So I never learned that. I suppose there are some people who think that way, and it's unfortunate because if you eliminate female or minority founders from your consideration as an investor, then you've eliminated more than half of the population, significantly more than half the population. And it makes, just purely from an investment standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense to do that.
I'd love to jump in here too, because I think that one of the issues, especially in the Valley, is that it's not, I think for unfortunately a lot of investors is they're not yet intentional enough to realize how the deep unconscious bias that they have, which is that investors in a lot of industries, not just tech, leverage pattern matching, right, to make decisions. And so when they're looking at a deal and they're like, oh, okay, we have a strong technical founder, went to Stanford, worked at Google, the other one did, marketing or biz dev at Facebook. And, so they look for these cues, I think, on people's backgrounds and resumes, but those backgrounds and those resumes usually are the result of a path of privilege. Like, there are lots of wildly successful founders who've built multi-billion-dollar businesses who dropped out of college, who never went to Stanford, who never worked at Google. But there have been also a lot of businesses where that was the founder's background. And not that there's anything wrong with going to an excellent university. Obviously, that's a great way to set yourself up for your, professional future. But I think that when you look across the playing field, not all people have the opportunities to have early education that leads them down that path. Doesn't mean that they don't have visionary, game-changing ideas and that they're not going to be world-class entrepreneurs. So I think that in a lot of these teams, they just kind of look the same. They're two white guys, one's technical, one's non-technical. They have the same background, same resume. And I don't think that investors sitting around the table are sitting there going, oh, I'm a racist because I continue to invest in white guys. It's just they're looking at their resumes and they're not being aware of the fact that they are creating this problem because they don't think about it and they're just leveraging this pattern matching. But it's deeply unconscious but it's creating this horrible effect that people have to break, and they have to think about, like, great founders can build businesses all over the country, and great founders don't have to have Ivy League educations, and great founders don't have to have worked for, one of the big tech companies in order to build exciting businesses. And I think that that's where people have to start being very intentional and expanding their thinking in order to fundamentally change what this landscape looks like.
Absolutely agree, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that that point, Leura, around pattern matching. I'm curious, and I open this up to each of our panelists. I'll start, Alice. I'd love to start with you, and then go to Bill. What have you done personally or professionally, or what do you see teams doing to deconstruct that pattern matching biases and other forms of what ultimately ends up being experienced as basically discrimination? So, Alice, would you mind weighing into that one, and then we'll go to Bill?
Sure. The first thing I guess I would say is it's important, I think, that people keep in mind, and I'm sure Leura knows this because she's a leader in the industry, that 75% of venture funds never make any money. So we should sort of take VCs off a pedestal and say, probably they aren't that great at picking winners in the first place. So clearly the patterns that they're pursuing and what they're seeing, they definitely do that. We all do that. Studies show that a venture capitalist is more likely to invest in a startup founder he probably invested in previously who lost money than a founder they've never met before. So I just think it's important that we sort of check the whole, are VCs amazing talent pickers? Not really. Like, statistically, they kind of bomb a lot. And that's good news for the rest of us who are saying maybe we should build a different ecosystem that doesn't create the same problems or replicate the same issues of this very intensive capitalist system that benefits very few people and even fewer people than we think it does. So I guess on our end at Creative Startups, we were founded with the idea that the weird and the wonderful is what makes the world go round. And from an organizational standpoint, we have always worked to be pretty explicit about our values. The other thing is we try hard to do the work. So I wrote down, you probably see me over here writing notes because I'm like, what? That's brilliant. Don't confuse activity with progress or achievement. So I think at our organization, honestly, the one failure we've made is we don't tend to do the theater. And we find ourselves in this moment now where statistically we've worked with about 400 companies, 72% are led by women or people of color. And I think the number is like 41% women of color. But we fundamentally don't see ourselves as a diversity and inclusion organization. We see ourselves as an organization that believes that there's talent everywhere, and it's our job to go find it and open the door. And so it's this concept of theater for me is really interesting because I sort of feel stuck where I don't want to just say the words. I want to do the work. We love doing the work. And yet on a personal level and organizational level, it's like we're caught in this moment. And I'm very curious to know what other people are doing so that we move past the words and we do the work, but we also say the words because we've got to keep saying the words because a lot of people still aren't listening. So I'm just curious what other people are doing.
Absolutely. That's actually a great place that we want to go next. And we'll do that. And then Bill, I'm going to come back to you with the second part of that question. So I open this up for each of you, and I'll just kind of state your name and then we dive in. But what have you done, or what are you doing personally and professionally in your organizations to find top underrepresented entrepreneurial talent to invest in? Sort of where are your channels that you're tapping? So Bill, I'll go to you and then to Joe.
So, Dr. Alice, I love what you're talking about. I wish I could keep seeing people up here. Every time it comes up, it pops up, and all I see is myself. So I just want to double down on what Dr. Alice said. She said, first of all, VCs are over-indexed. They're absolutely over-indexed by entrepreneurs. I deal with hundreds of entrepreneurs, if not thousands, every year, and they over-index for VCs. Someone once did the study, and they said, as a first-time founder, you're about as lucky to die in the shower as you are to get funded by a venture capitalist. You just heard Kobe talk about he funds 2 deals a year. What deals is he going to fund? He's going to fund people he's invested before. We have to be creative about how we think about this. And I love the weird and the wonderful make the world go round. Not only do the weird and wonderful make the world go around, they make money. They make money. And there's one thing, by the way, Joe and I are here to represent old white guys, and we're kind of like in the middle of this, and we can see it. And I love your comment, Joe. If I didn't have black friends, I wouldn't have any friends at all at sometimes. It's exactly the same thing for me. But people look at me and they go, oh, here's an old white guy who went to Harvard and is at MIT, and they don't understand the why. That's why I go back to the empathy. You have to find people who have empathy. There are certain people, if you try to convince them to invest in you, you are simply wasting your time. If you try to convince them to be allies of you, you're simply wasting your time. They don't have empathy. You have to find those people. You know, it's the old saying, no matter how much you try to polish a sneaker, you're never going to turn it into a shoe. And I'll never forget one of my students, he came into the class, Elliot Cohen, and he said, students asked him, when did your company start succeeding? He goes, oh, that was easy. When I stopped wasting my time with skeptics and I started focusing on the believers. So I would give you that. And I would just say this one other thing to your point. There's so much to say on this. Joe, and Deirdre, you said this. What motivates me? What gives me that empathy? Because when I grew up, you know, all I wanted to do was play basketball. That's all I wanted to do. I played basketball every day, all day, till my feet bled. And I would go down to the playgrounds and play. I'm from New York. And nobody cared who your mommy and daddy was. Nobody cared if you were black, white, green, or all they cared about was whether you won or not. And I played with people who I have nothing in common with when we started, except that we won. Because if you won, you stayed on the court. If you lost, you were off the court. And it's the same thing for venture capitalists, by the way. It's the same thing investors. They want to win. And what does win mean? They make money out of it. So you have to understand the rules of the game. And you've heard this from other speakers today. And so you have to show them how you can win. So to your point, Deirdre, what we do is we first of all hire people with very diverse backgrounds. Black, white, LGBTQ, you name it, we hire them. We get exposure to them. Because if you can't see one, you can't be one. We provide our platform to be able to do this. And then we measure the success. So let me just give you an example. Of our students who go through our entire program, they go through the full program. They succeed. They're at success being they're in business 5 years later. They're still in business. I don't think that's a perfect measure of success at all. 75% of them are still in business. We then measured what are the ones who have female CEOs. And I would, if we had this and I could interact with people, I would say, what does everybody think that would be with the female CEOs? Does anybody have a guess? One's what? Joe, you're an old white guy. Throw yourself out there and make yourself vulnerable. 90%. The 75% included everything, and about a third of our CEOs are female. 90% were still in business. Now, that doesn't mean that they were the unicorns. So there's still more work that needs to be done here. But that type of stuff, Deirdra, is what you need to show. Because just like there might be somebody down at the playground, I might want to play with Joe, you know? But you know what? If he doesn't play defense, I ain't playing with him. I'm playing with that young blonde Jewish girl from Alabama, and who I might have nothing with, because we're going to win, and that's what matters. By the way, that was the best line of the entire day, Laura. I got to give you credit for that.
Indeed, thank you.
But I think we have to understand the rules of the game, and it's to win. And then what do we need to do to win? And if you win, then you show the data, and they will love these. That line: the weird and the wonderful make money. The straight and narrow don't. The ones who follow the rules, they don't make the money. It's the diverse teams that are, when all the fish are swimming this way, they're not only willing to swim that way, they like swimming that way. Those are the people who change the world. And those are the people that they want to find. They want to find the hungry, the humble, the hardworking, and that is us. Well, you know, that's the people who are on here today, and that's what we have to come across. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, that's all right, Bill. No, this is the conversation we want to have, right? A number of the funders that have participated so far today have said, understand my mindset. So you're talking to me when you arrive, you know, in order to have the conversation with me that I want to have, you need to understand what motivates me. So Joe,
Peter, can I just say one thing though? I don't want anybody to leave here over-indexing on what VCs say, because that's Allison's. VCs are very, very important. Trust me, I wouldn't be in this house right now. I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for VCs. They're a great tool to have, but you don't always need a chainsaw. Sometimes you can use a little old axe, or maybe a pair of scissors is the right thing to use. But don't over-index, and that's Alice's point, especially in this world today that we're in, because it's the gap here that we're talking about in funding. And that if you listen to Reid Hoffman, God bless his soul, I think he's a nice guy, and you think you need to blitz scale, boy, you are crazy. You are crazy. That is for the people, that's for the frat boys who go to Stanford and MIT, who have access to money, and their safety net is their parents' trust fund or something. That is not for our community, just to be clear.
But just to jump in here, because I really feel like I understand what you're saying, but at the same token, in order to create true equality, the way that it is not only allowed, but celebrated for white male founders to get venture dollars and fail miserably, right? Not only is that okay, but it's celebrated. Why can't that be for everyone? Because there's so much that people do learn in those journeys. And I think that better businesses would be spit out the other side for everyone, whether you're a female founder or a person of color. Like, everyone should have access to that capital. And that's where venture is supposed to be, for scaling companies that have to, you know, invest significantly in hardware before they can create a really big business, or get to a certain scale before they can create something, you know, really big on the other side. But there's also a lot of learnings and a lot of failure. Like, most of the, you know, multi-billion-dollar companies come from second and third time founders. Yeah. So that ability to access that capital and fail is something that everyone should have the access to, and everyone should be allowed to, you know, get it and fail and fall down. And I think that like, for me, that is the message, versus like, listen, you're not going to raise money because you're a woman or you're a person of color or just fundamentally different. So like, don't even try going down that path.
All right, Laura. So
that's not what you're saying, but I think that
let's go back and forth here, because this is much more interesting than everybody agreeing with each other. All right. So, as we yes, I wish that all that were true, but it's not true. And so, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I'll tell you how my answer to this is, we understand the rule, just like I did. You know, I grew up. And and that's why I love what Joe's talking about. I showed up at Harvard. Look, I showed up at Harvard. I went to public school. I show up with a $50 car, and I thought I was so rich. And then I met these people, and it's like, holy cow! I have no idea what I'm doing here. So what do? I then figure out the rules of the game, and I start building my community. If you need someone to support you, and then you have that community, you have to build your community. The community is the one who'll pick you up. What's their community? It's built into them. They were born into it, right? You know, mommy and daddy will, but we have to build our community amongst ourselves. We have to build the cookout that we can all help each other in. And that's what's happened. I didn't succeed in my first one. I didn't succeed but I built the community, and that's what we have to help each other. You can't get this, you know, or all of you know, your odds of being successful on your first one are not high. It gets better the more times you play. So I really buy into this. But what I would not buy into, and I don't want my students to buy into it, is we're not going to compete until the rules are fair. No, we're going to learn the rules of the game, and we're going to hack the system, and we're going to keep getting ahead. And by the way, when we get to an near equal place, guess what? Our muscles are going to be so much stronger. I don't need to tell you this. Every woman I say, they said, we have to do the job twice as good as a guy, and therefore by the time we get to it, we can run circles around them. You know, and that's there. So that would be my advice. Look, I wouldn't want it to do this. I wish it was as equitable as it was down at the playgrounds, you know, where it was a true meritocracy. But entrepreneurship is much more so than any other part of life that I've found. You know, when I worked at a big company, you know, they realized pretty quickly that I didn't know what forks to use and things like that. But in a startup, nobody gave a damn because we made a product. They wanted that product. They paid us for that product, and we had success. By the way,
I just want to weigh in on a few things.
Melissa knows.
So first of all, when I say, you know, entrepreneurs who pitch investors, you can leave it on the full. I like seeing everybody. It's great.
Yes.
Yeah, way better. Thank you. I just don't want any entrepreneurs to think, well, that VC said my company isn't worth it, so clearly it isn't. Wrong. You probably know way more than whoever that VC is, right? Second of all, I have been married to a Stanford frat boy VC for 20 plus years. And I will tell you that his first reaction when he gets pitched is if people don't ask him about himself, not because he's a narcissist, but because he grew up low income, basically in the middle of Illinois, got a full ride scholarship to Stanford. Like his background is very humble, and he wants to connect as a human being first. Yeah. Because he's probably going to be involved with that company for 10 years. Yeah. And so he, you know, that point that somebody made about, you know, like understand what his daily set of stuff he has to do is and who he has to respond to and why he lives in Santa Fe, all those things. I think that's the smartest thing that any pitch should start with is who are you? Why are you at the table with me? And if they don't have an answer for you that involves who you are too, you don't want to work with them. You know, you just figure it out are you humans who want to work together? The last thing I would say, I think this conversation between Leura and Bill is very interesting, but I also am fascinated by the idea that finally we're building this, as you say, the cookout on our own. Because you can knock on the door and ask to come in at the party, but if you're not invited, they're not going to let you in. So let's go throw our own party. And let me tell you, once it's bigger and better, they'll come knocking on our door. That is exactly what we've seen with creative startups. We've been doing this work forever. And I was introduced one time 10 years ago as the woman who runs the Little Accelerator because we weren't the tech accelerator. We crushed them. Right. And now they all want to do. So we just keep building our cookout and crushing it and having the data and making the achievements happen. And the people will come to us and then we can choose. Do we want to work with you or not? And I'm so excited to be seeing these kinds of events because it means we're finally in a place where we get to build our own party. So.
That's spot on, Alice, and something that just a couple of real gems in this exchange. And I love the full screens too, so I can see everybody at one time. There's magic in it's both, Leura and Bill. It's in order to change the game, you have to know the rules as they're played today, because then you're in the field, right? And so it's elements of both perspectives. And I really do invite all of the folks listening and participating today to access and own your own version of Weird and Wonderful, right? And present that and include that as you're doing, as Alice so beautifully said, say the words and do the work. So that being said, though, I know we're approaching our time, man, it goes quickly. I'm curious about questions from participants. There have been a couple of things added. One is, this is from Festus. And it says, I totally agree with you, Leura. I think it was when you and Bill were sharing your perspectives. He's just curious, though, about experience versus certification, which, in some of those places where you mentioned the formal education is great in one space, but it's not, it shouldn't be limiting. So I'm not sure if that's something you want to weigh in on.
Sure.
For that question.
I mean, we've seen it. And if you look at the top performing VCs, especially at early stage, that when you're making a bet on a founder, it is like, or company, an early stage company, it's all about the founder. So we actually look at companies and 80% of our decision is on the founder founding team, and 20% or less is about the actual product, if they even have one, in the market that they're going after. And what we look at is a combination of vision, execution, intelligence, and character. And really, that's what we are we're fundamentally trying to understand who you are as a person, what drives you, what your vision is. And the bigger, the crazier the vision, the better. We like people who really swing for the fences. And that can come from a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds, with a lot of education or with no education. So we really don't care what your formal training or educational background is. We want to understand who you are as a person, fight to build something big, what you're going to do.
Oh no, Leura, I think
one of the that's great.
Okay,
Are we
you were breaking up just a little bit there. Sorry. Okay, you might want to.
Yeah, no. So I mean, it's all about the founder and the problem that they're trying to solve, and that can come from a lot of experience, a lot of education, or it could come from a totally unexpected background. And so I think that once again, not all VCs see it that way, but I think when you talk to some of the best performing early stage VCs, they will always tell you bet on the founder and their vision and their ability to execute and their character and their ability to dig deep than someone who has a better resume, better background, and in more traction, whatever that means at an early stage company.
Oh, thank you so much for weighing in there. Our next question actually relates to one that I have for you as well. I'm curious about some of the programs and initiatives that you're most proud of that increase funding to entrepreneurs of color. And specifically, I want to pronounce this correctly, Gaurav. To what, in your opinion, what are the top non-equity sources of funding? We mentioned that VC is not the pinnacle, but what are some of the other options? Let's see, Joe, I'll go to you, and then Alice, and I'd love for anyone to weigh in.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood the question. You said what are the top non-equity sources of funding?
Exactly, that's one part of the question from Gaurav. Yeah.
Top non-equity, meaning like lending and so forth?
I think just in general, the question may have been, and Gaurav, please feel free to weigh in if this is additional insights for your question, but we've talked about today that VCs are not the only sort of pinnacle to target. What are some other options that folks can take? And I think, Bill, you wanted to weigh on this as well. So Joe, I'll start with you.
Sure. So other than venture capitalists, there are angel investors. Typically will invest in companies that are much earlier in their stage of getting going. Non-equity, if I understood that part of the question, non-equity meaning loans, super hard to get for a startup. Really very hard. Banks, if you think, okay, you'll go to a bank and get a loan, banks are charging interest rates of 6 or 7%. That is not enough to offset the risk they would take. Whereas angel investors, there's some stats that came out a while back about angel investors, and an angel investor who invests in 10 companies, the stats basically say 4 of those are going to go to total zero, total loss of money. 5 are going to be break even as a group. And 1, you depend on 1 to make up for all of the 4 losses, the 5 break evens, compensate you for that risk you take, because you don't need a degree in statistics to understand. If I walk up to you on the street and say, 4 are going to fail, 5 are going to break even, what do you think is going to happen with the 10th? Any reasonable person would say, well, it's probably going to be a 0 or maybe a break even. So it's super risky what angel investors do to invest in. And good angel investors do a lot of due diligence. They're very picky about the investments that they will make. So it's very unlikely that you would get someone to lend you money unless they're friends and family. Then they might, because they love you basically. But super hard to get funding from like a bank if you're a very early stage. You don't, especially if you don't have an MVP already, and even if you do, that's going to be very tough to get that kind of funding.
Deirdra, I'd like to jump in. I have a couple of thoughts here as well. I mean, I think the world really is opening up when it comes to alternative ways to access capital. And I think 10 years ago, this conversation would have been about strictly what you do to access equity or venture capital or angel capital, and what you do to make yourself appealing to the bank. Well, guess what? There's this whole open space in the middle. Fewer than 3% of entrepreneurs ever raise venture capital. Fewer than 18% ever raise debt capital from a bank. And so there's a massive unserved market that people are getting smart about. Things like revenue-based financing, where you might get kind of a convertible agreement that helps you make it through that gap to grow what may not be attractive to a VC in terms of scale, but still represents a huge opportunity for business growth. That's an option that's really emerging. And I'd like to hold up the work that a couple of great folks across the country are doing. So Darren Reedus in Cincinnati has raised a $40 million CEF5 fund that they're really focusing on this revenue-based financing model. There's a great firm in Kansas City that's doing this work called Novel Growth Partners with Carlos Antiquera and Keith Harrington. And we've actually made through an organization called Capital Access Lab some investments in kind of holding up this model and supporting this new form of investment that's a better fit for a whole lot of people.
Thank you so much for the additional insight there, Melissa. I know this is a very keen topic for each of us, and we're approaching our time, believe it or not. We're approaching the 5-minute mark, so I'm going to turn things to Bill. He has a perspective here to share, and then we'll round things out with some closing thoughts.
Real quickly here, this is what I tell my students all the time: is the number one source for you to get revenue is your funding you're overlooking, and they almost all do. It's very simple. It's called the customer. Go to the customer and get them to pay you for it. If you get them to prepay you for it, by the way, it might be easier than going out and raising money. It might be less, if you do it, you're going to be on target for what you need. It will make it easier to raise money the next round. You will raise money at a higher valuation. It blows my mind how obsessed my students get with, I need to go raise venture capital before they have gone to customers and got them to commit. It is not as hard as you might think. I got over $1 million from Honda to do this, and we didn't have anything. We didn't fake it that we had it. We said, here's what we'll build if you give us 1/3 of $1 million up front, and you give us 1/3 halfway through, and then you can pay at the end. And oh, by the way, we'll give you a discount. Nothing can be less expensive for you than doing that. Give them a damn discount. When you raise money through equity, it's really expensive. It gets you off focus. Now, don't do this unless that customer is one that represents the bigger market. But it just blows my mind that people overlook this. The first place you should try, go to the customer, get them to prepay you. If they really think your product is good, they will pay you up front for it, and you can give away some, we'll give you, for us, for Honda, it was a 6-month exclusive. We couldn't work with any other automotive manufacturer for 6 months. We were giving the sleeves off our vest. So I could go on and on about that. but I've exceeded my 60 seconds. So I'll pull it back.
No, they're
To the
more
group
than 60
planner.
seconds well spent, Bill. Thank you so much for that. I have to tell you, I'm so glad that we're landing with this particular topic. This is near and dear to my heart as well, that sales, revenue, nurturing that relationship with customer early and often is incredibly powerful and underutilized. So as we round out our time here, I open the floor for any advice that you have that you want to make sure that you share in this space, this candid space, and then I'll close us out. So I'll start with, let's see, Leura, it's your, I think you refresh. So any closing thought? If I give you a few seconds here.
Sure. My closing thoughts would be that, I think that what's great about entrepreneurship and building companies is that the rules are meant to be broken, and be fearless and go for what you want. And, don't be afraid of the rejection. 1,000 no's can lead to a yes, whether that's customers or venture capitals or programs that you want to get involved with, regardless of your background. And, don't be afraid to, break down doors and break down barriers to go for what you want, because there's a lot more people here to support those goals coming from different types of people today than ever before.
Fantastic. Thank you. Alice, how about you?
Relentlessly build your network. Follow up with every person you see speak today on LinkedIn, and just relentlessly build your network.
Great advice. Let's see, Melissa.
Yeah, I think, my parting thoughts are, don't be afraid to walk your own path. If, the world might be telling you to raise VC, the world might be telling you that what you're doing isn't big or important enough. But if you stick to your vision, and you really work with the people that are invested in you, like everyone here has talked about, you're going to have success, whatever that means to you.
That's right. On your terms. I love it. Joe?
I 100% agree with what Bill said about getting money from customers. That is absolutely the cheapest fundraising you can do. But if you are raising funding, I tell people this story that I've seen 300, 400 pitches probably, but I've only made 16 investments. And most of those pitches were from white males. Some of my investments have female founders or co-founders. Some founders aren't Americans. Some are people of color. But when you present to an investor, it's not like a test you took in school where if you made a 90, you got an A. If you make a 90, that is a miserably failing grade on a presentation to an investor. And you have to have the chops to back it up also. You can't just make a good presentation and then have nothing to back it up. So a 90 might get you a second look, probably not. Might get you into due diligence, but probably not. You have to make about a 97 or higher to actually get an investment. So you have to be 100% prepared. You cannot be anything less than perfect, essentially, in your presentation and in your thoughts of how you're going to make this business work.
Thank you so much, Joe. Bill, how about you? We are actually, I'm getting the signal that we're at our time. So Bill, you've shared some great insights, especially in that last space about sales. Any other thought before I wrap us up? You're muted.
The thing I just want to leave everybody with is nobody here wants to be judged the way they look, be stereotyped in any way, shape, or form. I love the story about Alice. Ask questions, know who you're talking to. Empathy can come in many different places. Hate can come from many different places. Find the person who will be your ally, and you might be surprised what they look like. This is about allies. So I would leave you with that one thing: empathy and building your network so that when you do find those people who support you, stay connected with them. Entrepreneurship is a pursuit of opportunities with resources beyond your control. A community is a way to even the playing field.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you to each of you for a rich dialogue today. I'm about to turn things back over to Morgan, and it's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you all so much. Allies and advocates are going to be necessary to make our dream at Kinetic of making funding accessible, adequate, and available for all entrepreneurs to pursue their entrepreneurial dreams real. So thank y'all for an awesome conversation.